Have you ever had everything going right and still ruined it? You finally get the job and start showing up late. You fall in love and begin picking fights. You promise yourself, this time it'll be different, but it isn't. And the worst part isn't the failure. It's the whisper inside that says, maybe I'm just broken. But what if that voice isn't your enemy? What if it's the part of you that's trying to protect you? There's something I discovered that changed everything. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. If you've ever run from your own happiness, this might be the beginning of coming home. Ethan Walker had everything lined up. A growing freelance career in New York, a loyal circle of friends, and just enough success to feel almost stable, but somehow, everything kept slipping. The job offer he needed most, ignored; the relationship that felt real, abandoned; the gym sessions he paid for, skipped. He wasn't lazy, he wasn't cruel, he wasn't confused, he was just gone. Every time things got good, something in him vanished, a slow fade, an invisible retreat, until one day a friend asked, "Why do you keep disappearing when life starts working?" And Ethan didn't have an answer. He laughed it off, changed the subject, said something about needing space. But inside he was spiraling, not out of anger, not even sadness. Just exhaustion from a pattern he couldn't name. He began to notice how often he ran from moments that mattered. He ghosted a dream client the day before the pitch. He left a kind, loving woman without a word. He skipped his birthday because he forgot. He wasn't self-destructing in flames. He was quietly erasing himself from the life he wanted. And in the silence that followed, came the question no one had ever asked him. What if you're not failing? What if you're protecting yourself from something you don't even see? That question didn't offer a solution, but it did something else. It cracked the shell, and suddenly, he couldn't unsee it. There was a part of him that wasn't trying to ruin his life. It was trying to keep him safe from what. That's what he would spend the next year trying to find out. And it all began with a single unopened email that sat in his inbox, unread, for weeks. The first time Ethan felt like he was too much. He was 5. He ran into the kitchen, smiling wide, holding a drawing. His mom was on the phone, busy, distracted. He tugged her sleeve, and she snapped. "Ethan, can you just stop for once? You're exhausting." That word, exhausting. It etched itself into his ribs. From that day on, he stopped bringing his excitement into rooms. He learned something most of us do. Joy can be annoying, presence can be overwhelming. Needing love makes you a burden. At school, teachers praised the quiet kids, the ones who followed rules, who didn't ask too many questions. Ethan was never that kid. He was the kid who wanted more answers, more laughter, more closeness. But the world taught him early more is dangerous, so he adapted. He got quieter. He got good at smiling when he felt hurt. He got better at saying no worries when he wanted to scream, and somewhere along the way, he forgot how to take up space, not physically, emotionally. Every time he started to feel big emotions, joy, anger, longing, he'd shrink. He didn't know why, he just did. By the time he was 12, Ethan was already saying things like, "I don't really care. It's fine either way. Whatever works for you." But it wasn't fine, it never was. He was building a life inside of a cage built from politeness, survival, and silence. A cage no one else could see. People called him easygoing, chill, low maintenance. But inside, Ethan was constantly editing himself, monitoring tone, adjusting energy, swallowing words. He'd sit in a group of friends, laughing, and still feel like a ghost, not because no one cared, but because he'd trained himself to disappear just enough to be liked, but never too much to be real. And when he finally grew up and started to want things, love, purpose, visibility, that old programming didn't disappear. It got louder. It started whispering in job interviews, in romantic moments, in therapy rooms. "You're too much. Don't get attached. Keep it light." and he obeyed until one day he didn't, because that whisper wasn't protecting him anymore. It was suffocating him. If you've ever walked into a room and wondered if your presence was a problem, if you've ever dimmed your joy just to feel safe, you know exactly what Ethan felt, and you also know that kind of safety, it's not living, it's hiding. And the thing about hiding for too long is, eventually you forget who you were before the hiding began. Her name was Lily. They met at a bookstore in Brooklyn, both reaching for the same poetry collection. It felt like a scene from a film. Awkward, endearing, electric. Ethan hadn't planned on falling in love. But Lily wasn't someone you planned for. She was laughter and depth wrapped in a single human, and for the first time in years, he let someone in. Late-night walks, breakfasts that turned into afternoons, a kind of intimacy he'd forgotten was possible. And just when things started to feel safe, he vanished, not all at once. First came the delayed replies, then the missed calls, then silence. No explanation, no goodbye. Lily, confused, heartbroken, texted, "Did I do something wrong?" But it wasn't about her, it never was. Ethan couldn't explain it, not even to himself. He just knew something felt wrong, not with her, but with the feeling, love, closeness, softness. It all felt unsafe, like something beautiful about to collapse, so he ran. And he told himself the usual lies. She deserves someone more stable. Just not ready. I don't want to hurt her, but the truth, he was already hurting her by disappearing, because somewhere deep inside, love didn't mean warmth, it meant pressure, exposure, fear. Love meant being seen, and being seen meant risk. As a child, when Ethan was vulnerable, he got shut down. When he was honest, he got in trouble. When he reached out, he got left alone. So now, as a man, when love got close, his body responded the only way it knew how: run. Not because he didn't care, but because caring meant danger. Intimacy became a battlefield. And the closer someone got to the soft parts, the more his mind screamed, "Protect yourself, even if it costs everything, even if it breaks someone kind, even if it breaks you." He didn't understand the pattern yet, but he was starting to sense it, like a song on repeat, that he didn't choose, but couldn't stop humming. And just when he thought he'd escaped it, he'd find himself alone again, wondering why silence felt safer than softness. It was a rainy Thursday when Ethan finally showed up to therapy. He didn't go because he believed in healing. He went because he was tired, tired of the cycles, tired of vanishing, tired of pretending he didn't want more. He sat on the couch, arms crossed, eyes down. His therapist, Mara, didn't rush. She just asked, "What made you come today?" He didn't answer right away, but after a long silence, he whispered, "I ruin everything that feels good." Mara nodded gently, no shock, no judgment. She simply asked, "What do you think you're protecting?" Ethan blinked. He hadn't thought of it that way. Protecting, he was sabotaging, right, running, but what if that wasn't the whole story? Mara said something he'd never heard before. Sometimes what you call self-sabotage is really self-protection, in disguise. She introduced him to a word, shadow. Jungian psychology calls it the part of you you don't want to see. The fears, the rage, the shame, the unmet needs, everything you shoved into the basement. Because the world told you it wasn't welcome upstairs, but the shadow doesn't go away, it waits, it learns, and eventually, it leads, not loudly, but subtly, through hesitation, through silence, through those moments you can't explain, when you flinch at kindness or push love away. Mara leaned forward, she said, "The shadow isn't evil, Ethan, it's just unacknowledged, and unacknowledged things control you." He let those words sink in, and suddenly, his past started to make sense. Every time he left a good thing, every time he disappeared, wasn't rebellion, it was protection. Because if he got too close to something beautiful, his shadow warned him, "Remember what happened last time. Remember what it cost to feel." So he obeyed. And the obedience looked like failure, looked like inconsistency, looked like flakiness. But underneath it was loyalty, wounded loyalty, to a version of him that still believed closeness equals pain, that still believed vulnerability equals danger, that still believed silence equals survival. He walked out of that session with no answers, but with a new question. What if I'm not broken? What if I've just been exiled from myself? And that question became the beginning of everything. The first letter was to Rage. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, 2:14 a.m., pen shaking in his hand. The city outside was silent, but inside it roared. He wrote, "Dear Rage, I don't know when you started living in me, but I've spent years pretending you weren't there. I called you immature, dangerous. I blamed you for wrecking things, but the truth is, you showed up when no one else did. You screamed when I wasn't allowed to. You protected me when being soft got me hurt. I never said thank you." He paused, and tears he didn't expect slid down his face. He folded the page, placed it beside him. Then he wrote again. "Dear Shame, you always arrive early, before the rejection, before the mistake. You beat the world to it, so I wouldn't be surprised. You kept me small, but also, you kept me safe." That night, Ethan wrote 6 letters to Rage: shame, fear, longing, guilt, grief, and for the first time, he didn't try to fix them. He listened. He imagined them not as monsters, but as exiled parts of himself, wearing armor too heavy to carry alone. He read the letters aloud. His voice cracked on some lines, and he waited. No lightning, no transformation, just breath, stillness, presence. Over the next few weeks, this became ritual: a pen, a name, a conversation, not to heal, not to banish, just to notice. He bought a box, labeled it "Unsent Letters." Each one felt like a small homecoming, a welcome back to the parts he'd buried, and something strange began to happen. He started to react differently. When someone cut him off in traffic, he noticed the surge of anger, but didn't explode. When he missed a deadline, he heard the shame rise up, but didn't let it drown him. He started saying things like, "I'm feeling tense. I think this is grief. I need a moment." He wasn't cured, he was becoming fluent in his own language, noticing the difference between a panic and a pattern, between a trigger and a truth, and slowly the shadow softened, not because it vanished, but because it felt seen. And when you start seeing the parts of yourself you once feared, they stop screaming, because they no longer have to. Integration doesn't look like peace. It looks like crying in the middle of the grocery store because a song from your childhood plays over the speakers. It looks like texting an apology and sitting with the terror of no reply. It looks like waking up one day and realizing you haven't self-sabotaged in a week, and then immediately wondering if that means something bad is about to happen. That was Ethan's life now: messy, honest, wobbly, but real. He stopped trying to fix himself and started learning to sit beside himself. Some days were tender, like walking barefoot on gravel. Other days he laughed at things that once would have crushed him. Healing didn't feel like rising, it felt like rooting. He kept writing, he kept breathing, he kept showing up, not perfectly, but more fully. He started telling the truth more often. "I'm afraid I'll mess this up. I don't know how to receive love." Used to running, "I'm trying not to," and to his surprise, people didn't flee, they leaned in, because truth, even when it's messy, invites closeness. But there were setbacks too. Old habits don't die quickly. Ethan had a panic attack before his first speaking gig. He canceled a date last minute out of pure fear. He ghosted a friend's birthday dinner, and each time, shame whispered, "See, you haven't changed." But a quieter voice began to answer back. Maybe growth isn't perfection. Maybe it's returning quicker. He learned to apologize, not performative, but real, not to soothe others, but to stay in relationship with them and with himself. One day in therapy, he asked Mara, "How do I know if I'm integrating? How do I know if this is working?" She smiled. "It's working when you stop trying to be someone else in order to be loved, when you let your shadow sit beside you, and it doesn't have to scream anymore. That landed like a stone in still water, because for years, Ethan thought healing meant becoming someone better, someone neater, someone softer, but healing meant becoming someone truer, the you beneath the performance, the you behind the apology, the you that never needed fixing, only witnessing. And once he got that, he stopped chasing healing like a finish line and started honoring it as a rhythm. Some days loud, some days quiet, but always honest, and that honesty became his compass. It started with the smallest thing. Ethan received a compliment and didn't deflect it, he just said thank you, no nervous laughter, no backpedaling, just presence. And that moment felt like a revolution, because for so long he'd armored himself in modesty, in self-erasure, in shrinking to receive without deflecting. Felt like standing naked in sunlight, uncomfortable but clean. He didn't notice the shift all at once. It was a slow accumulation, like tiny lights switching on in dark hallways. He found himself asking deeper questions. What do I actually want? What would feel kind to me? He stopped ghosting clients when he felt overwhelmed. Instead, he emailed, anxious about this deadline, can we renegotiate? He stopped saying it's fine when it wasn't. He started naming what was true, even when it felt risky, and the world didn't collapse, it responded. People met him with grace. The more he softened toward his own discomfort, the more others did too. He began keeping small promises to himself, stretching in the mornings, calling his sister back, eating real meals, nothing heroic, but deeply personal. It wasn't about discipline. It was about relationship to his body, to his needs, to his emotions. He noticed how his shadow showed up less as a saboteur and more like a warning light. I think I'm scared, he'd say mid-conversation, and instead of fleeing, he'd stay, sometimes shaking, sometimes sweating, but staying. Presence, he learned, isn't ease, it's choice, and he was finally choosing to stay with himself. One afternoon, walking through the park, he saw a little boy throwing a tantrum near a fountain, red-faced, kicking, screaming. The boy's father crouched beside him, calm and steady. Right here, he said, take your time. And something about that undid Ethan, he realized. That's what he was learning to say to his own shadow. I'm right here, take your time. No fixing, no rushing. Just presence. That moment became a mirror because for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like a battle inside himself. He felt like a companion to his own chaos, and that felt like peace. It happened on a Tuesday. Ethan was mentoring a younger designer, Maya. She was bright, talented, bursting with potential, but she kept second-guessing herself. In their session, she hesitated before sharing an idea, then shrugged. It's probably dumb. And Ethan felt something stir inside him, not frustration, recognition. He saw himself, 5 years ago, shrinking before speaking, disowning brilliance before anyone else could, so he leaned in and said softly, "Hey, your voice belongs here." Maya blinked, then nodded, and something unspoken passed between them. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone, thinking about that moment, how he'd spoken to her. The way he wished someone had spoken to him, with patience, with trust, with no rush to fix, only space to unfold. And that's when he realized he had become the very thing he once needed, not perfectly, not always, but genuinely. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real. He thought back to his earlier years, when every interaction felt like auditioning for belonging, when he'd measure his words, his energy, his entire self. Now he found himself listening more than performing, asking instead of assuming, pausing instead of reacting. He wasn't trying to be impressive, he was just present. That was new, that was different, and he noticed something else. He didn't flinch when Maya thanked him, he didn't dismiss it, he didn't say, "Oh, it's nothing." He simply smiled and said, "You're welcome." Those words felt earned, lived, not because he had answers, but because he'd stayed long enough to witness his own unfolding. Later that week, Mara asked him, "What's changed the most?" He paused, then replied, I'm not afraid to see myself anymore. And that more than any achievement felt like healing, because the shame that once drove him to disappear now stood beside him, not silent, but seen. He was becoming the mirror, not perfect, but honest, and in that honesty, others found permission to be soft, to be whole, to begin. They were walking through Central Park. Hand in hand, autumn had just started to whisper its way into the trees, golden leaves, crisp air, slow steps. Ethan looked over at her. Alina, she was kind, steady, not trying to save him. Just walking beside him, he realized something as they strolled in silence. He wasn't scanning for exit signs, wasn't rehearsing how he might leave, wasn't bracing for the fall. He was there, fully, and that scared him, not because she did anything wrong, but because peace felt foreign. He wasn't used to stillness without suspicion, wasn't used to warmth that didn't come with a price. They sat on a bench, coffee cups warm in hand. She rested her head on his shoulder, and for a moment, he froze, not visibly, but inside. A flicker of the old voice rose up, careful. This is where it usually breaks. But it passed because another voice, quieter, more rooted, said it's okay to stay. He exhaled and let his head rest against hers. That night he didn't run, didn't invent a reason to be alone, didn't ghost. He stayed, and when he got home, he noticed something else. His inbox, that email, the job offer he once left unopened, still sat there, months old, long expired. But tonight, he clicked it, read it. Not because he was planning to reply, but because for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what it said. He wasn't afraid of being wanted, of being seen. He was just curious. He walked to the mirror in his bathroom, looked at his own reflection, and didn't flinch, not because he loved every part of what he saw, but because he recognized the man looking back not as a project, but as a presence, not as someone to fix, but someone to meet. He whispered to the glass, "You're allowed to stay." And the echo didn't argue, it just returned. Gently, like peace learning his name for the first time. Ethan sat at his desk. The same desk where he used to write apology emails he'd never send, where he'd scroll job listings he'd never apply for, where he'd rehearse conversations he'd never have. But tonight, he opened his laptop, clicked compose, and typed, not because he was chasing something, but because he was ready, not for perfection, not for control, but for presence. He wasn't writing to prove anything. He was writing from wholeness, the kind you don't earn, just remember. And as he typed, he thought about all the versions of himself he once ran from. The 5-year-old who felt like too much, the teenager who shrank to survive, the adult who vanished every time joy got close. He didn't hate them. He didn't pity them. He just saw them and said, "Thank you for getting me here." That was the secret all along. The shadow didn't need exile, it needed embrace, not because it was right, but because it was real. He lit a candle not as a ritual, but as a quiet way of saying, "I'm here, I'm home." No fanfare, no fireworks, just breath, steady, soft, true. The parts of him that used to scream, they rested, because they weren't being ignored anymore, they were being included. And maybe that's what healing really is, not louder confidence, not unshakable joy, just fewer wars inside your own body. Ethan closed his laptop, took a sip of tea, and smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because nothing needed to be hidden, not anymore. So if this story spoke to something in you, if a part of you whispered me too, then maybe you're ready to stop running, ready to meet the version of you who's been waiting not for permission, but for presence. And if you are, leave a small note below, just 3 words. I'm ready now, you're not alone, and this is just the beginning.